Hello, everyone. The bittersweet time has come for my last recording of a presentation for this course. So I'll be covering break bulk shipping on the central Gulf Coast from Mobile, Alabama to Morgan City, Louisiana. And of course, I am Emily Ryder, and let's take it away. So an overview, I'll cover the overall objective that I had with this research question, some of the methods that I used in just discovering kind of the background as well as the actual data that I was going to need for creating my map, the learning outcomes that I found along the way, the academic structure of geography that this research project kind of helped illuminate or further, I guess, in my own studies here in the program. But then finally just looking at how I built my map for the project. So the objective that I think we were all kind of given to start with was really to just understand our topic and just kind of hit the ground with gaining a basic understanding of something that we were all pretty unfamiliar with. I know a lot of these topics, when first introduced, were just completely out of the ballpark in terms of anything that we had really studied before. And so I think it did a great job of making us have to do a little bit more in depth on something that maybe we weren't as passionate about. Fortunately, throughout college, you usually get to pick the topic that you want. It's something that interests you. So this kind of took us outside of our comfort zones a little bit. So my first objective was to understand what break bulk shipping is, how it differs from any other kind of shipping, some of the disadvantages and advantages of it, but then just an overview of the practices and what it is. Most people within the shipping industry that I had asked about, they actually had no idea what break bulk shipping was, and it wasn't until I kind of explained to them, it's things shipped outside of the shipping containers, the typical steel containers that you see kind of there on the coastlines. They were like, that makes sense. Yeah, just the loose cargo. So it was kind of interesting to see, just diving into something I had no background in shipping whatsoever. But now I look at it and I can tell you pretty much side by side, what varies between container shipping and break bulk shipping or loose cargo shipping, and some of the pros and cons of both of them, which is something I would have never thought that I'd have a knowledge in when you asked me, 4 years ago when I started at USM. That's definitely not what an emphasis of mine was. The second objective that I had was to create a web page and map illustrating the presence of break bulk shipping along the central Gulf Coast. So again, Mobile, Alabama to Morgan City, Louisiana. That stretches across 3 states. So Mobile is pretty central to the Alabama coast. The main port there, it actually goes up into the little inlet that they have. But then, there are the ports along the Mississippi coast, which are, right there, Pascagoula and Gulfport. Those are two major cities that we're familiar with. But then also, looking at Morgan City, Louisiana, which is kind of central to their coastline, so to speak, with all of the break-offs and islands that they have. But it covers a lot of territory. And so the initial plan was to look at more of the volume of products entering and exiting a port. But I had to change my means behind building a map and gaining data, just because of restricted access to volumes and things like that. It was just it was getting a little tedious, if you will. So I'll talk about that a little bit more when I get to the making my map section. But just, for your sake, if you guys don't have time to go and necessarily look at all of the blogs and web pages and everything, Break bulk shipping is the shipping of goods that are too large or too awkward or just odd to ship in a shipping container. So lumber is a big one. Also, machinery, big pieces and parts. Anytime they ship like windmills that are being put up somewhere, rather than break them down into itty bitty pieces and put them into a shipping container, they just ship the blades individually. Or if they're building some type of industrial structure, they'll ship beams and everything like that outside of the containers just for ease. And it really comes down to a matter of cost. So it costs a lot to have the product disassembled, transported to the shipping center, put into a shipping container. You've got to pay for the shipping, and then you've got to pay to house it somewhere, and then you've got to pay for it to be reassembled, and you got to pay for it to be transported to a different site. And it's this long process. Whereas if you were to just keep the object in its relatively assembled state and then ship it as a whole, all you're really covering is the transportation to and from the port and then the shipping costs. So it cuts down quite significantly. There are additional costs because break bulk shipping it requires additional equipment. You can see here in the picture on the right, they need special cranes and technology there on the ship and on the port, as well as additional warehouse and storage that can hold these types of things. So there is a pro-con, and it kind of balances out whether it's in the actual transportation or in kind of the shipping itself. It kind of balances out back and forth between the two. So the methods that I had to use for this it was just kind of review overall. Context on what break bulk shipping was. I found very little peer-reviewed articles and journals, just because they didn't really focus on what I was trying to accomplish. So I did, browse over them to make sure that I was understanding, just the general concept of break bulk shipping. But the greatest source of data that I came up with for, actual ports and what can be shipped, where can it be shipped, how much can be shipped, that kind of thing, that came solely from corporate and state websites. So I was able to peruse through some of the corporate websites for actual shipping industry companies and all that. But state websites were very instrumental in how I gathered data for each of the ports and the resources or products that were coming in and out of the ports. That all came from state websites. So I was very fortunate to be able to find one state port website and kind of backtrack and through a series of cross-referencing and changing the initials for the states and everything. Long story, but I was able to find a lot of that information. And when it officially came to time for mapping, again, those port and state websites were extremely instrumental, and I was able to get a really great breakdown of everything that was being shipped. The only hiccup that came with that was some ports had more information available on their website than others. So on one, I was able to get pretty much every ingoing and outgoing shipment quantity by pound for the 2019-2020 season, and they broke it down into quarters, and I was able to pull up the PDF and view a breakdown of every item, and it provided, a little description. If they were shipping fertilizer, it would have fertilizer, and then how many pounds it shipped in 2018 versus how many, or I guess it'd be in tons, tons of fertilizer in 2018 versus tons of fertilizer in 2019. And so it was very thorough, and I looked for that for some of the other ports as well, hoping that would give me more of that concentration that I was looking for with my map in order to outline how much, the volume of products being shipped, but I could not find it, so I had to resort to other methods. So just the learning outcomes from this project overall, I could say, yeah, I learned all about break bulk shipping and the shipping industry and all that. But I think bigger picture here is what this question more leaned towards. Um, it is, college courses definitely have paid off. I think Dr. Bass has made it known to us that 441 is a class where you're supposed to, prove what you learned. You're supposed to show your stuff. You're supposed to, uh, use the peacock method, if you will, kind of go around and flaunt and say, hey, I learned how to do this, and I did this all on my own. I did this with minimal, just templates on how to do things. You're no longer being given a Word document on how to make a map step by step. This was pretty much us recreating things start to finish. Research, we did get some help, using the library resources and how to adapt to kind of this learning environment and this presentation format due to COVID. But I think all in all, a lot of this came down to what have we retained over our time here at USM. And as I wrap up my 4 years here in the program, I was blown away, genuinely blown away by how much I was able to sit down and do without having to reference notes or do a quick Google search or look at the GIS websites or anything. I started to assemble my map, I think at uh, like 11:15 at night one night, and it just kind of started flowing out. My first step I'll get to there in the making a map section, but I was blown away by how I could just bounce between all of the steps and I could actually create a product just by memory. The research and writing aspect of this, I've written so many papers for this class and this program, uh, and it was just mind-boggling to realize that yes, I have learned, yes, I have retained, and now I'm ready to actually put that into action and produce a product, a presentation. So it was very very refreshing and kind of bittersweet to know that all along I hadn't just been retaining the information long enough to pass a final test at the end of the semester, but rather that I was actually learning things along the way. So it was kind of a checkpoint for me, and it was very very rewarding. Um, I also learned peer-reviewed articles save a lot of heavy lifting. I think I had known that for a while now, um, but I'd always seen peer-reviewed articles as, something that you get assigned and you have to write a summary about it and you have to turn it in to prove that you read it and you have to either agree or disagree with their outcomes. So it was always more seen as a project or an assignment whenever I had to look at peer-reviewed articles. But I've really found that even just skimming over someone else's research like that can save you so much heavy lifting when it comes to research, and it can kind of orient you into the right mindset that you need to be in to write a research paper like this, and just kind of steer you in the right direction, so to speak. Not taking what they've done or not copying anything by any means, um, but definitely reading what they've written and looking at their presentation and seeing what you can apply to your own work. And then, of course, I did learn about break bulk shipping. I've actually started to look at how I can ship some of my own things, not in a storage cargo container, because I have to get something basically from central Oklahoma down to me. And I was like, oh, what are the chances I could get this on a boat onto the Mississippi and then all the way down here, and it could just be kind of floating along on the ship. Yeah, it ended up not working out, but I did look into it now that I had kind of all these resources available. I tried, but break bulk shipping is definitely for things well beyond my means. It's a much more industrial process than just trying to ship oddly shaped items. So how this project fit into academic structure of geography. I used both quantitative and qualitative research, and mostly the quantitative is kind of what the focus in the map was on. What products were being shipped, where they were shipping out of. I had to look at the specific ports and kind of understand which ports were relevant for the purposes of this assignment, but then also the quantity of products shipped. I mentioned I found that for very few of the ports, but I did get that information, so I did look at it and I paid attention to it to see, which ones were deemed necessary to put on the map as products coming out of that port. But then I also looked at qualitative research, the pros and cons of break bulk shipping, shipping preferences, and the different methods for storing and shipping different products. And that was more of the contextual side of the research project, so more of what I needed for the introduction and kind of the overview, if you will, for the actual written portion, but it was almost strictly quantitative when it came to the mapping side of it. So then building my map, these are kind of the three different stages that I went through. I had two base maps that I had to create and then one layout map that kind of had the finished product on it. So the base map, it's probably where I was most proud of myself. This is the one that I started with, just to give myself, that base map to build off of. So I had to import U.S. major cities data, and I thought I could recall it from one of my previous GIS classes, but I actually had to go to the GIS website and download their free data that they have there on their endless library of information. But then I had to select from that data, that attribute table, I had to select all of the cities listed in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and then I had to go in again and select all of the ones that I was looking for from Mobile to Morgan City. And with that, I had to create a completely new layer so that I could actually manipulate the data there in its own attribute table, and I could narrow it down from the thousands of other little dots that appeared on my map. And then I had to create symbology for it, so that I had the little push pin icon, which I'll show you on the next slide. And I had to adopt a different color scheme and do all the sizing and scaling to it, and kind of make it my own map. And then create labels, font, color, size, and placement in relation to the symbol. So a lot of when you get into GIS, it's kind of just, it's brick kind of structuring. So everything is like red, black, white, and it's all very squared off. There's almost no personalization to the products. So I had to go in and change all of that, and that was all from memory. I did all of that without any reference to anything else. That was all my mind being put into a product. And so I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to recall it. And yes, you all may be much better at ArcGIS than I am, but for me this was a big deal. I haven't taken a GIS class in about a full year now, maybe a year and a half. So it's been a while. So a lot of this was just, all right, Emily, let's see what we can recreate from scratch, from memory. So the base map number 2 was where I actually got into the nitty-gritty of finding the data, and for each and every city, I had to go in and look at what product they had coming out of or into their port. So I went more by most common products, and that's kind of how I chose to make my map. So I went through and I made an Excel spreadsheet that had the 5 different ports that I was using, and then across the top it had all of the different products that I was looking at. So it had coal, lumber, agriculture, poultry, fruit, hazardous chemicals, steel, iron. It had all those, and underneath I would put a 0 or a 1 depending on if it was present there at the port or not. So 0 means they don't have that trade going in and out of that port, or 1 meant yes, we do have that trade coming in and out of the port. And then I had to create a layer for each good that I was talking about, and I had to create a symbology that would adequately and visually represent what I was trying to convey in an appealing way. It was more the visually appealing side that was kind of getting to me. But I started to go with a stacking bullseye with color coding sequence, and again you'll see on the next slide. It essentially lets you see which ports have similar good processing, and so you can kind of start to see the overlap between goods going in and out. And it was just the most visually appealing and less tedious with the data that I was able to create and figure out. So the layout map number 1, that was just a matter of getting the labels right, adding a legend, a north arrow, a scale, and then exporting it. So it has the different stages here. In the top left-hand corner, you can see that's just with all of the U.S. major cities, and then that's all the pink. The yellow is all of the cities in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So that was kind of the first step, is just making sure that I could distinguish between the two, and then slowly but surely select each and every one of them out. On the right hand side in the upper corner, you can see the first base map that I made, where I labeled Mobile, Pascagoula, Gulfport, New Orleans, and Morgan City. And I created the pushpin thing. I had the labels going off in a 45 degree, or I guess that'd be 135 degree angle, and making it visually appealing. I always tend to go towards the gray and black background, just because I think it makes the colors stand out a little bit more. And then in the bottom section here, you can see the table that I created, where I had to go into the attribute table and individually add in the grain, lumber, steel, iron, chemicals, all that. I had to add in all of that data by hand, so that definitely took some time. But then, so you can see the final 2 maps that I put together that are going into my web page. On the left hand side, that's the base map for indicating where the different port cities that I've chosen to use in my research project. And then on the bottom right hand corners, you can see the actual final product. That is the bullseye color coded system that I came up with in order to show and visualize and illustrate all of the different products coming out of the different ports. So Mobile, obviously the only one with coal. It's one of the biggest coal ports in the entire United States. It's the leading one, and it's the only one down here in this area, in the central Gulf Coast area. But then you can see some commonalities, with the hazardous cargo you can find both in New Orleans and Gulfport. So that's kind of the idea behind this, is that you can look at the different colored rings, and you can look at the bottom and you can see the correlation between the different ports and see which ones have what good in common. So that was really fun to figure out and to come up with on my own. And I'm really proud about it. I kind of did a little dance in the kitchen as soon as I got everything organized and spaced and put together like I wanted it to do. So I'm very happy with this presentation, with this project. It started off a little bit rough, and I definitely was one of the ones to procrastinate going into this. But once I started moving on everything, I realized that it was fun to put this together, and kind of show USM and the geography department and all those associated with it, show them what I've learned, even if it's just a quick snapshot of all of this. Um, so I hope you guys enjoy this presentation, and or if you get to see my webpage, I hope you enjoy that as well. And I look forward to seeing all of yours. Thank you for taking your time to watch this. I know I'm 10 minutes over, but I guess that's kind of my norm. You guys have stuck with me through all my presentations where I usually do double the time. So thank you all, and I look forward to seeing your presentations.